we're looking at the great divorce again, and it struck me that I neglected to mention the most obvious thing to say about the book, which Lewis mentions right at the outset, which is that he is responding to the postulate of William Blake, who wrote a work called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And that's absolutely crucial, really, to understanding what's going on here. Because in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Blake presents what, as he does throughout his literary corpus, same in the Songs of Innocence and Experience, presents love in all of its manifestations as an unambiguously good thing. And there are simply expressions or understanding of them that arise at different times in life. But the love per se, the desire as such, is only deficient insofar as it is weak. If it's strong and passionate, then it is of necessity good. And so the marriage of heaven and hell is just simply the expression that all desires are on a continuum, as it were. There's no such thing as hell. In fact, the heavenly figures in Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell are the ones who restrain their desires. And so they call themselves heavenly or pious, and for Blake, they're hypocrites. And if they simply embraced and expressed their desires more fully, they would be more fully human. That's Blake's notion of the marriage of heaven and hell. And that is opposed to what Lewis himself is presenting here in The Great Divorce, which is that love of itself, in and of itself, is not good. It's only good insofar as it expresses the love of God. And insofar as it deviates from that, it is defective. So he's going to amplify this when we look at the four loves, which we will in a few classes. But the portrait that he presents here is Augustinian, so I'm going to read from Preface to Paradise Lost here, his section on Augustine, which is rather appropriate here and helpful. Having written a chapter in chapter 9 on the doctrine of the unchanging human heart, which sanctifies our desires and sees every age exactly the same way. This is the doctrine of the unchanging human heart is probably that of Romanticism. But you could call it Pelagianism as well, because it has common features. Here's what Augustine and Milton have in common about doctrinally and as it's portrayed here in The Great Divorce. So first of all, God created all things without exception good. And because they are good, no nature is bad. And the word bad is simply the privation of good. That's essential to his portrait here, because he portrays the ghosts as having goodness in them, insofar as they still exist. However, there's a lack of something in them, insofar as they cleave to hell or want to return back there, they lack substance. Whereas heaven is the exact opposite. It is everything that is good and solid and real, as I said last time. So the hell, or the earth, and we can come to the section in The Great Divorce where he talks about how the earth is either a hell or a purgatory, depending on how you look at it and from what angle, is an absence of joy as well. He'll connect all of these things. Being, joy, fulfillment, all those things are present in heaven. And they're anticipated on earth, but depending on how one responds to them, whether one loves God for God's sake or whether one loves something else in his place, one will either reside in heaven or in hell. So even what we call bad things, he says, are good things perverted. And in a creature, that perversion arises when a creature becomes more interested in itself than in God and wants to exist on its own. So they want the good things rather than the good. So what that means is that things that we love are loved for their own sake and not for God's sake. So there's a very much of a hierarchy here. He'll expand on this in the four loves to a great degree. And he will portray various figures who did something that was lovely in life. There's an artist, there's a mother, there's a lover, a whole list of figures. And they did things that they loved and which were genuinely good, but because they loved the thing rather than what gave rise to the love to begin with, they lose the good of the thing that they initially celebrated. And then the question is, how much of them is left when they have devoted themselves to these things? And the Bible calls this love of something other than God idolatry. And it can take the forms of things that are very socially acceptable. So everyone understands the problem of addictions to drugs and alcohol. These are perverted forms of love as well. There's an idolatry, right? And it ruins the person. But what is less recognized are the things that Lewis goes through. He's not even going to bother with alcoholism. He'll talk about how a mother loves her son, and her love becomes oppressive because it's for the boy. It's only for the boy, and then it eventually becomes a possessive love. He's going to illustrate that when he comes to, in the four loves, to his discussion of storge, the familial love, and the necessity for us to die to ourselves. So the primary trope here, which is one that Luther observes in his book of the Romans, is the description of sin as being ense curvatus, curved in upon ourselves, the self-regarding, navel-gazing form of love, in which we, rather than look to God, replace God with ourselves and even our desires. So there's a self-absorption. And in Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell, as long as the love is strong, it's good. Whereas in Augustine and Lewis and Milton, Paradise Lost, not so. Insofar as the love is falsely directed, it is directed towards something that is not. As much as we wish it were something, it really is nothing. All these things were made by God, and they are to be worshipped for the sake of God. And if that is out of place, then increasingly we live not only in idolatry, but also a sort of a desperation and an emptiness. That's what he portrays here, it seems to me. So let me read a little bit more about what Lewis writes about Augustine. From this doctrine of good and evil, so evil is, from the sin of pride, something that wishes to exist on its own, independent of God, outside of God, wants the good thing but doesn't want the God that created the good thing. Remember, Milton's Satan's rebelled because he thought himself impaired when the Father appointed the Son. Satan and his pride had a thought of rebellion because he thought he ought to have been honored. And he says the mind is its own place, and in and of itself can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven. So that also bears on this text as well. The idea that we create a heaven and hell, it fits with our way of thinking. Now, the Kantian philosophical turn, which talks about things outside us conforming to our capacities to perceive this, entrenches it as a philosophical stance. So love then is, Kant's not interested in love, by the way. He's interested in epistemology when he says this, but it has an effect on Christian doctrine. So love then becomes our capacity to feel love and to express love. It's varying degrees of that. And that's what Blake represents here. Whereas in a Christian understanding of love, or a classical for that matter, love is related to the nature of the object. And so again, we'll come to that when we talk about the four loves that Lewis articulates there. But so what we call bad things are good things that are perverted, and he will repeatedly talk about that in The Great Divorce. But there's this desire to exist on our own without God. From this doctrine of good and evil, it follows, A, that good can exist without evil. But evil cannot exist without good, because existence itself is good. And so if no good existed at all, to be perverted, Satan himself would cease to exist. And ultimately there's a nothingness to this about evil. So it's a privation of the good, but it's also like a parasite on the good. And that Lewis portrays that in The Great Divorce as well. There's this parasitic love of something good there that ultimately, if it's not given up, if it doesn't die to itself, it can't be fulfilled. So that's from chapter 10 here of Milton and Augustine. There's more in there, but that was sufficient for what I wanted to say here. And that's where he begins this. It's a meditation on Blake's heaven and hell, but really what he's suggesting here, it seems to me, is that this idea, which is in the very modern philosophical mindset of things conforming to our capacities, not only to perceive them, but to love them, because I do think that follows from Kant's Copernican turn. Right? You've done enough Kant, I assume, those of you who've done philosophy, to see that Kantian, the Kantian Copernican shift is one in which things conform to our capacities, so our abilities to love, rather than being lovable. And so when he discussed at the beginning of the abolition of man, the distinction between the sublime and the beautiful, it was all contingent on feelings, rather than the actual object being sublime or beautiful, right? So he's talking about a large heretical turn which affects modernity, and the idea that everything that we love must be ipso facto, because we love it, must be good because our desires are good. And so it contradicts church doctrine on human nature as well, which is that we're good but fallen. But it can't dismiss any sort of desire as long as it's strongly held enough. So the Blakean heresy, which he doesn't call a heresy, but I do, he is resolutely confronting here and presenting a different view of it. So, and interestingly, the things that are the strongest are the things that are least of ourselves. So he flips it directly on its head, and that's the pivot point. For Blake, whatever we desire the most strongly is the most real. For Lewis, the thing that that is least of ourselves is the most real thing. And so the desires themselves are not bad, but they must be put to death in order to be resurrected and become what they ought to be. So this is The Great Divorce. Now it is a moral fantasy, a theological moral. It's an imaginative one, and I do think it's a direct response to William Blake, which is very interesting. Another work which I did not put on the syllabus, but I thought about, but I thought it's too marginal for the purposes of the class here at any rate, is a work called The Personal Heresy, which he said, Lewis says, began with Wordsworth. Very interesting. He loved Wordsworth, by the way. But he said the personal heresy began with critics like Wordsworth, who moved the attention away from what kind of composition is a poem. So if you're doing literary theory with me, we talked about this shift. It went from what is a poem, what's a poem like, what are the criteria of a good poem, to the other question which Wordsworth is interested in. It is what kind of man is a poet. So let's look at the sort of man who writes poetry. It becomes about the writer's feelings. And never mind the poet, then that shift can be made in a myriad of ways. What kind of person is a mother? What kind of person is a lover? So it's the subjective turn there. And he involves himself in his literary criticism with this. This does not go away. I think he retains this. By the way, he is debating another literary scholar by the name of E.M.W. Tilliard, who's also a very great scholar, I think. Tilliard thinks that poetry is an expression of the author's personality. Most people, when they write, come here or anywhere else where I've taught, they want to write to express themselves. It's total understanding. I want to express myself in music or in writing, whereas Lewis's position is that what an author does is external to the author. One is subjective, the other is objective. The objective one can look to standards of excellence and so forth, but this is a large gulf that lies between Lewis and Tolkien and I would say the literary establishment even. Not just E.M.W. Tilliard, but another scholar at Cambridge whose name temporarily escapes me here. I've got it in my notes here. Can't believe that I've forgotten the name. What's his name? Where is it? F.R. Leavis. Well, I'll leave it off for those of you, because I know many of you aren't even English lit's not even your subject per se. But it's a big shift. Now, from this will come schools of interpretation that are more interested in either what the poet meant to express or its corollary, what do we feel about the poem? The reader response. It's the same mistake. It's just here, what did the author express? How do we feel about it? Both forms of the personal heresy. Both fallacies of sorts in a literary sense. Lewis even calls them a heresy, which I think is quite interesting and correct. So in The Great Divorce, that's the real shift, is that idea of anything that we love being good as long as it's powerful enough. So all the loves are on a continuum versus the other, which is if it's directed towards God, it is good, and anything else is not good. But it's not that it's bad, it lacks goodness. So that idea of the privation of the good, the orthodox conception of evil, by the way, the Boethian standard, the Augustinian standard, that's what Lewis cleaves to here. So there aren't two powers in the universe, a good and a bad. There's only the good. The bad is the absence of the good. That's how he portrays it in The Great Divorce. So it's consistently, I would say, orthodox. Note that when he presents it in his fiction, like in Narnia, there are evil characters there per se, but they lack power. They seem to have some sort of power, but in the presence of Aslan, they sort of almost fade away and disappear. And then ultimately, when they go into the real Narnia, it all fades. But we talked about that in relation to the trolls last time. The troll is expressing the personal heresy. The trolls are for the trolls. Right? They're going to look after themselves. They're going to love themselves alone and nothing besides that. So it's narcissism, really, if you will. This thing that Luther identifies as just pure narcissism, the characteristic of our age. Present in the church as much as anywhere else. The cult of the pastor, the celebrity pastor. So I'm just going to, I said to you last time, the way I'm going to try and come at this is to look at specific chapters and demonstrations of this dynamic, because it is just simply a consistent dynamic. He goes through a variety of figures that all illustrate the truth that I just articulated, that God is lovable in and of himself and for himself, and everything was made by God for God. And furthermore, that life was made not only by God and for God, but that our fullest human identity is expressed when we love God, when we worship God. And since we were made by God to worship him, worship is essential to our nature. If we don't worship God, we will worship something else. But not worshiping is not an option. The reason people think that it is because some people are not very expressive people, and they're abstract and they're intellectual. They're caught up in their heads. But the way Lewis presents this is still a form of worship. It's just an abstract, dried out, intellectual love of themselves. Right? Whereas when we think of worship, we think of something more self-expressive, more effective, more passionate, right? When you think of worship. But Lewis doesn't present it that way, but it is still a species of worship. It's the worship of the self through the intellect, without the body. Still. So in towards the end of the 4th chapter, when he has... No, I'll conclude with a line from the bottom of the last of the 3rd chapter. As he sees the bus, and the bus has departed, and he's coming to the foothills of heaven, he makes this comment. I saw people, the last paragraph, I saw people coming to meet us. Because they were bright, I saw them while they were still very distant. And at first, I did not know that they were people at all. Mile after mile they drew nearer. The earth shook under their tread as their strong feet sank into the wet turf. A tiny haze and a sweet smell went up where they had crushed the grass and scattered the dew. Some were naked, some robed. But the naked ones did not seem less adorned, and the robes did not disguise in those who wore them the massive grandeur of muscle and the radiant smoothness of flesh. Some were bearded, but no one in that company struck me as being of any particular age. And then here's the comment that I liked. One gets glimpses, even in our country, of that which is ageless. Heavy thought in the face of an infant, and frolic childhood in that of a very old man. This is what he describes as joy, or the weight of glory. And the weight of glory is present even in the midst of a passing, vain world. Here, it was all like that. They came on steadily. I did not entirely like it. 2 of the ghosts screamed and ran for the bus. The rest of us huddled closer to one another. So all of the spirits, having decided they were going to go to this on the refrigarium, as I mentioned, the holiday to heaven, have chosen to go there. But when they get there, they don't like it. Some of them want to go back immediately. They retreat back to the bus, and they were going to go back where they came. Others will continue to stay there, but then they'll stay there for different reasons. And they're, by the way, allowed to stay permanently if they should so choose. But now they're being presented with a choice. And we'll have to talk about the dynamic of choice and the importance of choosing as well. Because although there's a sense of orchestration in the plot, and in Milton's Paradise Lost, and in Christian theology in general, after all, God, if God is God, then he ordains all things and is sovereign over them all. Otherwise, he's not God. Remember, he's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipotent. All things work in accordance with his good and perfect will. It's just, if you deny that, then you can't be a Christian at all. All the same, the importance of choosing is essential to being in the presence of God, because to love him is to choose him for his own sake. So he follows Milton in emphasizing the importance of choosing that. Now, the choice involves another sort of choice, which is the choice to let go of the thing that impedes you from being joyful. And I'll come to some passages which illustrate this choice quite starkly. But it's always a choice. The beings, the spirits, no, the ghosts, because the spirits are the heavenly beings and the ghosts are those that are from hell or just visiting there, which can be made into spirits, are being presented with the possibility to stay and to go on and become more and more solid. And many of them don't want to be. They want to hold on to their love, which actually is just a picture of what love really is, but they don't see that it's a frail, faint, at best an anticipation of true joy. And they would rather control it, because that control is something about themselves that they value, and that what they most value about themselves is themselves. Whereas they have to die to themselves in order to truly live. They have to lay down their life. And their life isn't just meaning they're going to die. It means that they are going to die to themselves. So in 4, he comes on. Now let me start with, at the end of 4, summary of a lengthy discussion. Last few paragraphs. The joyful spirit says, come and show me now that you're able to go on. Said the other with laughter in his voice, it will be joy going to the mountains, but there will be plenty of work. This figure is your common day man who doesn't want anything to be given to him that he hasn't earned. Right? He's as honest as the day is long. He wants to be given credit for things that he's done rightly. He doesn't want to be blamed for anything he hasn't done. So he wants pure honesty. But he wants that to be acknowledged. What he did, he wants to be evaluated and praised. So, come and show me now, said the other with laughter, because you're going to be able to work there. It will be joy going to the mountains, but there will be plenty of work. You don't suppose I'd go with you. Don't refuse. You will never get there alone, because he wants to do it on his own efforts. This is the moralist. And I am the one who was sent to you. So that's the trick. See, he can't make it on his own. Another has to accompany him there. He needs help. This is a man who is an autonomous individual. He has looked after himself. He doesn't want help from anyone else. He's going to pull himself up by his own bootstraps. Quite thank you very much. He doesn't need anybody else's help to get him there. But he says, don't refuse. You will never get there alone. And I am the one who is sent to you. So that's the trick, is it? Shouted the ghost, outwardly bitter, and yet I thought there was a kind of triumph in its voice. It had been entreated. It could make a refusal. And this seemed to it a kind of advantage, because now it's put the locus of power within himself again. I can make the choice. Ha-ha. I thought there'd be some damned nonsense. It's all a clique, all a bloody clique. Tell them I'm not coming. See, I'd rather be damned than go along with you. I came here to get my rights, See, not to go sniveling along on charity tied onto your apron strings. If they're too fine to have me without you, I'll go home. It was almost happy, now that it could, in a sense, threaten. That's what I'll do, it repeated. I'll go home. I didn't come here to be treated like a dog. I'll go home. That's what I'll do. Damn and blast the whole pack of you. In the end, still grumbling, but whimpering also a little as it picked its way over the sharp grasses it made off. So it wanted to get to heaven on its own merits and would not allow any assistance. It wanted to save himself. So this is the traditional portrait of sin, which wants to do it through moralism. So this is the moralist. And he can't go on. Then we come in chapter 5 to Dick and the apostate. So there are two characters here. One of them is a great theologian, probably the sort of Anglican clergyman that Lewis would have met regularly. And I'll pick up some of the discussion here because it will deal with the sort of intellectualizing of the problems that Blake identified here. And one of the things that is being presented is the orthodox theology, the idea that there is a literal heaven and a literal hell, and that they aren't, as modern theology suggests, just objectifications of our desires for a better place. So heaven is the place where all of our desires are met. It's a symbol of our self-worth being eternalized, whereas hell is everything that is that we think is evil, objectified, but it's not really a place of substance. So here's the dialogue. He says, so it's Dick and the probably a bishop. But Dick, I shall never forget some of our talks. I expect you've changed your views a bit since then. You became rather narrow-minded towards the end of your life, but no doubt you've broadened out again because they're in heaven. Right? So now you're not quite so narrow-minded. Well, what was the nature of the narrow-mindedness? How do you mean? Well, it's obvious by now, isn't it, that you weren't quite right. Why, my dear boy, you were coming to believe in a literal heaven and hell. That was the narrow-mindedness. But wasn't I right? Oh, in a spiritual sense, to be sure. I still believe in them in that way. I am still, my dear boy, looking for the kingdom, but nothing superstitious or mythological. Excuse me, where do you imagine you've been? Ah, I see. You mean that grey town with its continual hope of morning. We must all live by hope, must we not? With its field for indefinite progress is, in a sense, heaven. If only we have eyes to see it. That is a beautiful idea. I didn't mean that at all. Is it possible you don't know where you've been? Now that you mention it, I don't think we ever do give it a name. What do you call it? We call it hell. There's no need to be profane, my dear boy. I may not be very orthodox in your sense of that word, but I do feel that these matters ought to be discussed simply and seriously and reverently. Discuss hell reverently? I meant what I said. You have been in hell. Though if you don't go back, you may call it purgatory. If you don't go back, it was a place that was where you're being tormented. Go on, my dear boy, go on. That is so like you. No doubt you'll tell me why, on your view, I was sent there. I'm not angry. But don't you know you went there because you are an apostate? Are you serious, Dick? Perfectly. This is worse than I expected. Do you really think people are penalized for their honest opinions? Even assuming for the sake of argument that those opinions were mistaken, do you really think there are no sins of intellect? In response, there are indeed, Dick. There is hidebound prejudice and intellectual dishonesty and timidity and stagnation. But honest opinions fearlessly followed, they are not sins. So again, As long as you believe it strongly enough, it can't possibly be a sin. So it's the strength of the conviction, the strength of the love, even an intellectual love. As long as it's strong, it can't possibly be a sin. The apostate speaks as somebody, a creature of the Enlightenment or the Romantic era, because they're the one and the same, actually. Honest opinions fearlessly followed, they are not sins. Dick, I know we used to talk that way. I did it too until the end of my life when I became what you call narrow. It all turns on what are honest opinions. Mine certainly were. They were not only honest, but heroic. I asserted them fearlessly. When the doctrine of the resurrection ceased to commend itself to the critical faculties which God had given me, I openly rejected it. I preached my famous sermon. I defied the whole chapter where Christ portrayed as rising from the dead. I took every risk. What risk? What was it? What was at all likely to come of it except that what actually came? Popularity, sales for your books, invitations, and finally a bishopric. So he got promotion in the church for the denial of the resurrection. Dick, this is unworthy of you. What are you suggesting? Friend, I am not suggesting at all. You see, I know now. Let us be frank. Our opinions were not honestly come by. We simply found ourselves in contact with a certain current of ideas and plunged into it because it seemed modern and successful. At college, we just got started automatically writing the kind of essays that got good marks and saying the kind of things that won applause. When in our whole lives did we honestly face, in solitude, the one question on which all turned? Whether, after all, the supernatural might not, in fact, occur. When did we put up one moment's real resistance to the loss of our faith? So you see the intellectual form of exactly what I described as the central pivot for the whole of the Great Divorce. But here presented between a bishop who is an apostate and a young man who is narrow-minded, or being anathematized by the bishop as being narrow-minded for believing in a literal heaven and a hell and for believing in a literal resurrection and so forth. So here it's presented in a theologically and intellectual form, what we will see elsewhere not presented in those forms, but rather in more familiar terms of relationships and so forth. But there are such things as intellectual sins. I'll come to one final snippet of this dialogue. He says, if this is meant to be a sketch of the genesis of liberal theology in general, I reply that it is mere libel. Do you suggest that men like? I have nothing to do with any generality, nor with any man but you and me. So again, note that he's debating with the bishop, and the bishop is pulling himself away from the real discussion question. Right? What do you believe? Not, let's talk about the contours of the possibilities of a debate. This is the debate. Where do you stand on this? You. Oh, as you love your own soul, remember, you know that you and I were playing with loaded dice. We didn't want the other to be true. We were afraid of crude salvationism, afraid of a breach with the spirit of the age, afraid of ridicule, afraid, above all, of real spiritual fears and hopes, says the young man. In response, the bishop, I'm far from denying that young men can make mistakes. They may well be influenced by current fashions of thought. But it's not a question of how the opinions are formed. The point is that they were my honest opinions, sincerely expressed. So again, there's the appeal to sincerity. If I mean it sincerely, then how can I be condemned? Because it's an expression of myself. What's the belief that lies behind it? It's the personal heresy. It's Pelagianism. there's a belief that original sin doesn't touch our loves. They were my honest opinions sincerely expressed. The young man, Dick, responds, of course. Having allowed oneself to drift, unresisting, unpraying, accepting every half-conscious solicitation from our desires, we reached a point where we no longer believed the faith. Just in the same way, a jealous man, drifting and unresisting, reaches a point at which he believes lies about his best friend. A drunkard reaches a point at which, for the moment, he actually believes that another glass will do him no harm. The beliefs are sincere in the sense that they do occur as psychological events in the man's mind. If that's what you mean by sincerity, they are sincere. And so were ours. But errors which are sincere in that sense are not innocence. Not innocent. You'll be justifying the Inquisition in a moment. Why? Because the Middle Ages erred in one direction, does it follow that there's no error in the opposite direction? So this is all at the intellectual level. Lewis thinking as a Christian and thinking to the sorts of arguments which he himself would once have argued. Because if you are going to stand for Christian truth, that means that you are going to invariably be excluding certain positions, intellectual positions. And at the end of all this, he says, even now will you repent and believe. So he tells him to repent, the bishop, at this point, his old friend. I'm not sure I've got the exact point you're trying to make. So he wants to keep it still in the realm of discussion. What point are you trying to make here? I'm not trying to make any point. I'm telling you to repent and believe. But my dear boy, I believe already. So here's the problem. We may not be perfectly agreed, but you have completely misjudged me if you do not realize that my religion is a very real and very precious thing to me. Very well. Will you believe in me? Will you come to the mountains, etc.? Okay. And then one final thing. It says, thirst was made for water, inquiry for truth. What you now call the free play of inquiry has neither more nor less to do with the ends for which intelligence was given you than masturbation has to do with marriage. And then the bishop is offended at the language. If we cannot be reverent, there is at least no need to be obscene. So this is a theological debate there. I'll skip over the rest of it, but I think that is very interesting in discussing the realm of ideas and how that pivots around the idea of sincerity, the sincerity of the human heart. Denies original sin that even affects our ideational world. For this, it's the mere strength of the belief or the passion which validates it. So it denies the corruption of the soul, which Christian theology, of course, affirms. And only calls there to be a corruption insofar as it is a corruption, it's a privation of the good. It's an absence of the good. And it's a love of that absence and our control over it. So the love of self. So it keeps on going back to that. I think I'm going to skip over 6. Let me go to 7, the hard-bitten ghost. No, I'll run out of time and not get to what I want to. I'll skip over the hard-bitten ghost. The proud lady in 8. The proud lady in 8 gets this response. I'll just read one line. Shame is like that. If you will accept it, if you will drink the cup to the bottom, you will find it very nourishing. But try to do anything else with it, and it scalds. Let me come to 9, because this is the pivotal chapter when he meets George MacDonald. And George MacDonald was a Scottish clergyman. He was a Calvinist, because basically everyone in Scotland in the early 19th century would have been a Calvinist. But he moved away from, I would say, an orthodox Calvinist position on this. Later in his life, he was basically indigent, almost starving. Wrote many books. The books were very influential on Lewis growing up. Lewis embraces him here as a guiding light in the same way Dante greets Virgil. There's a little snippet here I'm going to read from MacDonald's children's story, The Princess and the Goblin. And it will partly illustrate what will follow here. In The Princess and the Goblin, there's a princess whose name is Irene, and she helps a young miner whose name is Curdie, Curdie, to escape from goblins who've imprisoned him in their caves. And she does it with a magical thread. Her grandmother gave her a magical thread, which leads her back home. So it's not the breadcrumbs of other fairy stories, it's a magical thread. And the magical thread leads her back, but Curdie can't see the thread. So he says that her story is nonsense. Even though she's led him back with the magical thread, the story is nonsense. There is no magical thread. Denies it. And of course she's upset by this because she's come all the way to save him from the goblins with the magical thread, and the man that she's saved is basically saying that she's not credible and she's not telling the truth. So we'll get it from both sides. When Princess Irene comes to the grandmother who gave her the magical thread, she says this, the grandmother, "He's a good boy, Curdie, and a brave boy. Aren't you glad you've got him out?" "Yes, grandmother, but it wasn't very good of him not to believe me when I was telling him the truth." And then the grandmother, "People must believe what they can, and those who believe more must not be hard upon those who believe less. I doubt if you would have believed it all yourself if you hadn't seen some of it." So that's part of what Lewis is presenting in this is, although he's quite firm on the notion of the love of God being the defining quality, he recognizes that people can't see it because literally they can't see it. And so let's not be too hard on them for that. But on the other hand, he presents this, when Curdie gets to his home, he has a conversation with his mother. And he's not apologetic about how he's treated Irene. And here's the conversation. "It's no explanation at all, mother. I can't believe it." And then the mother, that may be only because you do not understand it. If you did, you would probably find that it was an explanation and believe it thoroughly. I don't blame you for not being able to believe it, but I do blame you for fancying such a child would try to deceive you. Why should she? Depend on it, she told you all she knew. Until you found a better way of accounting for it all, you might at least have been more sparing of your judgment. So it's both sides here are to some degrees being corrected by a maternal figure, right? But of course there was a magical thread. The point embedded in the passages is the puzzle about belief and faith as a gift. That's what's being presented here. Because Lewis is pretty consistent here in his presentation of the idea right at the outset that somebody can't earn their way to heaven. It's not something that we create ourselves. You can't get there on your own device. It's not possible. It has to be given to you, and you have to accept the gift. Likewise here. On the other hand, if it is actually a gift, you can't be too harsh on people who haven't received the gift because they haven't been able to understand it. You can pray for them. You can present it to them. You can offer them the opportunity. But they genuinely can't see it. They're blind. Now, he's not presenting God's perspective, by the way, on the person. He's saying from our perspective. So those who don't believe can't just decide whether what someone believes seems plausible to them or not. They have to consider the character of the person that's believing. They should consider that. Now, that was, remember, Diggory, when he was in the form of the uncle, said precisely that when Lucy came back and the kids were faced with this, do you believe, little Lucy? Which of them is more likely to tell the truth? Because this is an implausible story, I grant. But which of them is more likely to tell the truth? Well, and they both say, well, every time I would have said it would be Lucy. Well, then, she's not mad. She's not a liar. So it must be true. The Lord, liar, lunatic. Possibility that he presents in Mere Christianity. Right? Now, Lewis, in 1930, when he makes his conversion, realized that he's been given a gift, and it's a gift of faith. But he recognizes the givenness of it. Now, this is the character of love, though. Love is a gift. He wants to draw a distinction between, and he will do this in the four loves, between need love and gift love. And the need love is, we all need love, yes. But the love of God is not something that we create out of a need. It's something that's given to us. So that's, again, a pivot point here. And that's what he's going to display in these dialogues with George MacDonald. So it begins, chapter 9, "Where are ye going?" said a voice with a strong Scotch accent. I'll spare you my Scotch accent here. I could do it all right, but I'm not going to do it anyway. "The sound of the unicorns had long since died away, and my flight had brought me to open country. I saw the mountains where the unchanging sunrise lay, and in the foreground 2 or 3 pines on a little knoll with some large smooth rocks and heather. On one of the rocks sat a very tall man, almost a giant, with a flowing beard. I had not yet looked one of the solid people in the face. Now, when I did so, I discovered that one sees them with a kind of double vision. Here was an enthroned and shining God whose ageless spirit weighed upon mine like a burden of solid gold. And yet, at the very same moment, here was an old, weather-beaten man, one who might have been a shepherd, such a man as tourists think simple because he's honest, and neighbors think deep for the same reason. His eyes had that far-seeing look of one who has lived long in open, solitary places. Where are you going? He answers, I don't know. Then sit and talk with me. Who are you? I don't know you, sir. My name is George MacDonald. Now this is Lewis as one of the characters, right? Oh, I cried. Then you can tell me. You at least will not deceive me. Then supposing that these expressions of confidence needed some explanation, I tried, trembling, to tell this man all that his writings had done for me. It's like Dante speaking to Virgil here. I tried to tell him how a certain frosty afternoon at Leatherhead Station, when I'd first bought a copy of Fantastes, being then about 16 years old, had been to me what the first sight of Beatrice had been to Dante. Here begins the new life. But he lays up his hand and he stops me. Son, he said, your love, all love, is of inexpressible value to me, but it may save precious time. Here he suddenly looked very Scotch. It's a comment on the Scots. If I inform ye that I'm already well acquainted with these biographical details, in fact, I have noticed that your memory misleads you in 1 or 2 particulars. Oh, said I, and became still. Ye had started, said my teacher, to talk of something more profitable. Sir, said I had almost forgotten, and I have no anxiety about the answer now, though I have still a curiosity. It is about these ghosts. Do any of them stay? Can they stay? Is any real choice offered to them? How do they come to be here? Did ye never hear of the refrigerium? A man with your advantages may have read of it in Prudentius, not to mention Jeremy Taylor. The name is familiar, sir, but I'm afraid I've forgotten what it means. It means that the damned have holidays. Excursion, you understand. Okay. So he says then a few lines down. Is judgment not final? Is there really a way out of hell into heaven? It depends, says MacDonald, on the way ye are using the words. If they leave that grey town behind, it will not have been hell. To any that leaves it, it is purgatory. And perhaps ye had better not call this country heaven, not deep heaven. Ye understand. I'll go back to Narnia. Right? This is the shadow of the real thing. Here, he smiled at me. Ye can call it the valley of the shadow of life. And yet, to those who stay here, it will have been heaven from the first. And ye can call those sad streets in the town yonder the valley of the shadow of death. But to those who remain there, they will have been hell even from the beginning. So now, love is presented as a sort of a pilgrimage. And the pilgrimage is going in one of two directions. Are we going away from God in this life, or are we going towards Him? If it's the former, we will move away into a ever less substantial and more joyless existence. But we'll choose it for its own sake. Whereas if we go in the other direction, it will become more solid, more real, more joyful. The pivot point will be, will we leave ourselves behind? He says, son, you cannot in your present state understand eternity. And then referring to his own fiction, Fantastes, when a notice looked through the door of the timeless, he brought no message back. But ye can get some likeness of it if ye say that both good and evil, when they are full grown, become retrospective. Not only this valley, but all their earthly past will have been heaven to those who are saved. So even those things in the mortal life will partake of heaven. Not only the twilight in that town, but all their life on earth too, will then be seen by the damned to have been hell. So from its end point, not from the vantage point of myself here, but look at it from where it ultimately goes. Now this is the postulate of wisdom, by the way. Look where your desires tend towards. What's the outcome of this form of life? This is, again, presented in Proverbs 1-9. There are two ladies calling on the street, the lady wisdom on the other hand, and the adulterous woman. And they're all saying, sample my wares. And here's the outcome. One leads down to Sheol, and the other to God. Let's look at it from the end point, not from the point that you've started, but where you will end up. So then he talks about salvation, and he says, then those people are right who say that heaven and hell are only states of mind? Hush, he said sternly, do not blaspheme. Hell is a state of mind. Ye never said a truer word. And every state of mind left to itself, every shutting up of the creature within the dungeon of its own mind is in the end hell. But heaven is not a state of mind. Heaven is a reality of itself, in itself. All that is fully real is heavenly, for all that can be shaken will be shaken, and only the unshakable remains. So when Milton's Satan says the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven, he's not quite correct. The mind is its own place if you stay only within your mind. That's true. But it can't make a heaven of hell. That's just vain boasting. And we see that in Paradise Lost because Milton brings Satan out of hell into the presence of paradise, and we're told that he carries the hell within him and cannot leave it. Because for him, he is hell. Carries hellish thoughts, so he can't even enjoy, never mind heaven, he can't even enjoy paradise. So Milton's, I think, also very much influenced by Milton's portrait here. Another section of this same passage, a couple pages on. He says, you'll understand there are innumerable forms of this choice. So there are all sorts of choices. Some forms that one hardly thought of at all on earth. There was a creature came here not long ago and went back. Sir Archibald, they called him. In his earthly life, he'd been interested in nothing but survival. He'd written a whole shelf full of books about it. He began by being philosophical, but in the end, he took up psychical research. It grew to be his only occupation. Experimenting, lecturing, running a magazine, and traveling too. All about survival. Digging out queer stories among Tibetan lamas and being initiated into brotherhoods in Central Africa. So he's an archaeologist of survival. Proofs and then more proofs again were all that he wanted. It drove him mad if ever he saw anyone taking an interest in anything else. He got into trouble during one of your wars for running up and down the country telling them not to fight because it wasted a lot of money that ought to be spent on research. Well, in good time, the poor creature died and came here. And there was no power in the universe would have prevented him staying and going on to the mountains. But do you think that did him any good? This country was no use to him at all. Everyone here had survived already. Nobody took the least interest in the question. There was nothing more to prove. His occupation was clean gone. Of course, if he would only have admitted that he'd mistaken the means for the end and had a good laugh at himself, he could have begun all over again like a little child and entered into joy. But he would not do that. He cared nothing about joy. In the end, he went away. So that the survival was for the sake of survival. We have to live in order to live. But there was no point, well, what's life for? Go back to what we said about equality. It's medicine, not food. So those who pursue equality and see it as the chief virtue, it's not even a virtue. It's just simply a resistance to the tyranny of others' sins. So in that sense, it's politically useful, but it's not to be pursued at its own ends. Neither is survival, because life is not for the sake of living. It's for the sake of God. But anyway, Lewis's comment, "How fantastic," said I. "Do you think so?" said the teacher with a piercing glance. "It is nearer to such as you than ye think." He's talking about somebody who came there who was a social scientist, trying to control life. He was one of the conditioners, right? But now it's nearer to you even, Mr. Lewis, than you think. There have been men before now who got so interested in proving the existence of God that they came to care nothing for God himself. As if the good Lord had nothing to do but exist. There have been some who were so occupied in spreading Christianity that they never gave a thought to Christ. Man, ye shall see it in smaller matters. Did ye never know a lover of books that with all his first editions and signed copies had lost the power to read them? Or an organizer of charities that had lost all love for the poor? It is the subtlest of all the snares. What is that? To become a professor or a pastor and to preach of the love of God but not love God, right? So you become acknowledged as having expertise in it. So it's a danger for the academic, for the teacher, for the adult. And so your early ardor for the very things which are good becomes your reputation, and then you're concerned with your reputation. So this is a threat, and probably more so in this university than it would be if you were in a public university and a Christian. You can, I've spent years studying at a Christian university, so I must take the question seriously, the relationship with God seriously, because after all, I've spent a great deal of money here. So it must be. There's the proof of it. My credentials, my qualifications, my commitment. It ends up being like the man who said, I want to be taken for my own deeds, and that I'm getting into heaven, but I need no help otherwise. So you don't have to lay down your own life. Let me come back to this. They hear a whining and a woman that moves off as a result of this. And Lewis says, he's very troubled. She isn't wicked. She's only a silly, garrulous old woman who's got into a habit of grumbling and feels that a little kindness and rest and change would put her all right. That's what he says. That is what she once was. That is maybe what she is still. If so, she will certainly be cured, says MacDonald. But the whole question is whether she is now a grumbler. I should have thought there was no doubt about that. And you just heard her grumbling. They were both heard her grumbling. Aye, but ye misunderstand me. The question is whether she is a grumbler or only a grumble. If there is a real woman, even the least trace of one, still there inside the grumbling, it can be brought to life again. If there's one wee spark under all those ashes, we'll blow it till the whole pile is red and clear. But if there's nothing but ashes, we'll not go on blowing them in our own eyes forever. They must be swept up. But how can there be a grumble without a grumbler? The whole difficulty of understanding hell is that the thing to be understood is so nearly nothing. So that's, again, go back to this. She's grumbling. It seems like a real thing, but actually it's nothing. Because what is the real thing is the rejoicing, not the grumbling. So somebody is grumbling really, and it becomes to dominate them, so this person is just a whiner and a grumbler and a complainer. It is so much, there's so little there that there's nothing really to understand, even though if it characterizes the whole person's life. Says MacDonald, the whole difficulty of understanding hell is that the thing to be understood is so nearly nothing. But you'll have had experiences. It begins with a grumbling mood and yourself still distinct from it, perhaps even criticizing yourself for grumbling. And yourself in a dark hour may will that mood, embrace it. Ye can repent and come out of it again. But there may come a day when you can do that no longer. Then there will be no you left to criticize the mood, nor even to enjoy it, but just the grumble itself going on forever like a machine. But come, you're here to watch and listen. Lean on my arm and we'll go for a little walk. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Right? Why is that commanded? Because it's a command. It's a funny old command. Okay. Is it about being happy? It's about living in reality. It's about recognizing that the earthly trials are, to some degree, nothing in comparison with how great the love of God is for those for whom he has sent his Son. Then you meet a vain woman, and she's trying to attract everybody in this life. She spent her whole endeavors making herself look beautiful, using her language to attract him. There, nobody's interested in her at all. She has no time for that. If they're not interested in her for her own sake, then she doesn't want to be there. She's consumed with her narcissism. Then we move to those people there in the shadowy land of the foothills of heaven, those who have come there to extend hell, to bring it bodily, if they could, into heaven. Tub-thumping ghosts who in thin bat-like voice urge the blessed spirits to shake off their fetters, to escape from their imprisonment in happiness, to tear down the mountains with their hands, to seize heaven for their own. Hell offered her cooperation. So these are the intellectuals, the constructionists, who create a heaven of their own conceptions. And he says, and interesting, this is a fascinating observation. He says that, and they seem to be wanting to scare others. And he said that, my teacher reminded me that the pleasure of frightening is by no means unknown on earth, and also of Tacitus' saying, they terrify lest they should fear. So those who are perishing seek to terrify other people to calm their own fears. Take the, right? If I'm terrified, the way I avoid being terrified is to terrify others. I feel bigger then. We come to a famous artist. This is very interesting. when you painted on earth, so he says that they're talking about God and so forth, and the artist says in our grammar, God is a noun rather than an action, which is correct. But in heaven, God does things. He loves, right? He is love, and love is an action. Whereas in art, so he says that. Oh, I see. I only meant by gum or something of that. So I meant, well, all this. It's. So here's the artist. I should like to paint this. I shouldn't worry about that just at present. If I were you, look here. Isn't one going to be allowed to go on painting? Looking comes first. See, again, he wants to do something. The artist wants to paint. It defines him. But I've had my look. I've seen just what I want to do. God, I wish I'd thought of bringing my things with me. The spirit shook its head. His head scattering light from his hair as he did so. That sort of thing's no good here, he said. What do you mean, said the ghost. When you painted on earth, at least in your early days, it was because you caught glimpses of heaven in the earthly landscape. The success of your painting was that it enabled others to see the glimpses too. But here you are, having the thing itself. It is from here that the messages came. There's no good telling us about this country, for we see it already. In fact, we see it better than you do. Then there's never going to be any point in painting here? Oh, I don't say that. When you've grown into a person, it's all right, we all had to do that. There'll be some things which you'll see better than anyone else. One of the things you'll want to do will be to tell us about them, but not yet. Here you must simply receive and delight. Come and feed, he says. Lots of discussion there. Every poet, one page on, every poet and musician and artist, but for grace, is drawn away from love of the thing he tells to love of the telling, till down in deep hell they cannot be interested in God at all, but only in what they say about him. So there's the danger. I shuddered when I read that. You can be so caught up in the craft of teaching or telling that you, even in talking about God, are only interested in what you have to say about him, but not about him. Right? The means rather than the end. Very hard for a pastor, a teacher, to put himself aside when he's the conduit for others in some ways, right? But anyways, so that's what he's talking about there, and I think it's obviously, this is George MacDonald speaking to C.S. Lewis, knowing the danger himself, and that of his tribe. Artists, theologians, not that he's a theologian, but academics, Christian apologists. I think he says in somewhere, he said, there's no doctrine less real to me than one that I've just proved. You get into an academic debate over the existence of God, you beat your opponent. At the end of it, you're not so sure about it yourself, because guess what? You won the debate. Now it's you. Well, then the thing that you've just exalted, God, seems less real to you than your success. Huge temptation of pride. Chapter 10, there's a domineering wife. I'll just skip over that. She wants to be in charge of her husband. In chapter 11 is very interesting, because chapter 11 illustrates something of the four loves. So there's a woman by the name of Pam who loves her son, and it's illustrating storge, familial love. That's where it begins. I will skip over that though, but you might want to look at that in 11. It's her son Michael, who she does love, but in the end, here's the pivot point. He says, she says to him, you wouldn't talk like that if you were a mother. You mean if I were only a mother, is the response of the Spirit. But there is no such thing as being only a mother. You exist as Michael's mother only because you first exist as God's creature. So you're not only a mother, and this is not your whole existence. And you who identified with yourself, with your self-sacrificial love for your son, have so identified yourself with that you're no longer even a good mother, because you've lost the whole point of your existence. The relation as God's creature is older and closer. No, listen, Pam, he also loves, he also has suffered, he also has waited a long time. So he skips over that, and then of course the mother loses her son. And she's bitter about this, because it was not just because she loved her son, but because her identity was wrapped up in that. So then he moves on from that, though, and I'll skip over that and move over to a different, and I'm not even going to get to just because of the time, I'm not even going to get to the Sarah Smith of Golders Green, but she is the portrait of sanctity, or the common woman in chapter 12. But let me conclude with this, because it needs to be said as well. He moves on from there. They move on a bit further, and there's a reflection on what they've just witnessed. And Lewis says to MacDonald, "Why did you bring me away, sir, when I passed out of the earshot of this unhappy ghost?" It might take a long while, that conversation. Oh, come on. I'll pick this up next time.